Madison Crane stood on a rolling chair in the middle of the bioengineering lab like she was about to drop a beat at Coachella. She had this little wireless mic clipped to her collar. Who brings a wireless mic to a Tuesday morning staff meeting? And when the room finally went quiet, she pointed straight at me with her coffee cup and said, "We're sunsetting Bob today, folks. Effective immediately." Just like that. 23 years keeping the imaging suites running at St. Lonning, Marian's, and I got fired in front of 42 people while she sipped a matcha and called it accelerating institutional readiness. My name's Howard Sotelo. I'm 59 years old, and up until that Tuesday, I was the chief biomedical engineer for St. So, Marian's Regional Medical Center in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. 412 beds, 2 trauma bays, the only Level 2 center between Des Moines and the Quad Cities. That word's doing a lot of heavy lifting these days. I didn't argue, didn't even raise my voice. I just unhooked the lanyard from my belt, that gunmetal carabiner I'd carried since 2003, and set it down on the lab bench next to the centrifuge. Master keys to the radiology vault, hard token fob for the radiation safety server, and the little brass key to the lead-lined cabinet where we kept the cesium-137 calibration sources for the gamma camera. I slid the whole bundle toward her across the bench like a waiter dropping off a check nobody asked for. "Best of luck, Madison." That was all I said. She gave me this tight little smile. The kind people do when they think they've just won something. What she didn't understand, what nobody in that room understood except maybe Raj from IT, who was looking at me like I'd just unplugged a bomb, was that those weren't just keys. They were every single point of authorized contact between St. Marian's and the federal government for our entire diagnostic imaging program. And she had no idea what she'd just taken responsibility for. See, Madison wasn't a hospital person. She'd been hired 6 weeks earlier as our new Chief Transformation Officer, a title that didn't exist before her, by the way, straight out of some health tech accelerator in Austin. 29 years old, master's in health informatics from somewhere I'd never heard of. Her LinkedIn said she'd scaled 3 digital health platforms, which as far as I could tell meant she'd worked at 3 different startups that all folded inside 18 months. She talked about patients like they were user touchpoints and called the ER the front of funnel. The CEO, Father Patrick Donovan, yeah, real father, this is a Catholic hospital, and he's a Jesuit who got an MBA at Notre Dame in the 80s. He loved her, or rather, he loved the deck she'd built in Power BI, showing how AI predictive maintenance was going to cut our biomen budget by 38%. Father Pat was 68 years old, had been running St. Leet, Marian since 1998, and was about 9 months from retiring to a fishing cabin in Wisconsin. He wanted a legacy project. Madison gave him one in a 30-slide pitch. The first round of cuts came 2 weeks before I went. Madison fired Brenda from Materials Management, 26 years on the loading dock. Knew every single FedEx and McKesson delivery driver by their kids' names because we were transitioning to vendor-managed inventory. Then she let go of 2 night-shift respiratory therapists and replaced them with a per-diem agency contract. She did all of it over Microsoft Teams. Brenda told me later that Madison had her camera off the whole time. But I was the trophy, the proof of concept. Madison needed to demonstrate to Father Pat that the old guard could be replaced with software, and I'd been at St. Marian's longer than almost anyone who wasn't a nun, so she did it loud. She did it on a Tuesday morning, all hands. She wore a white blazer like she was on television. I walked out past the imaging tech break room, past the wall where they still had a Polaroid of me holding the first MRI machine we ever installed back in 1999, and straight out to my Silverado in the employee lot. Didn't go home right away. Sat there with the engine off, watching steam come off the asphalt, looking at where my keys used to be on my belt. There's a strange lightness when something heavy you've carried for 2 decades is suddenly just gone. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like a missing tooth. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a manila folder I'd kept there since 2017, the year of our last Joint Commission survey. Inside was a stack of certifications, federal registrations, and a single laminated card from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission with my name on it, Howard L.L. Sotelo, authorized user, radioactive materials license number IA 447122, St. Marian's Regional Medical Center. That license is what lets a hospital legally possess radioactive isotopes for nuclear medicine. Without an authorized user listed by name, you cannot perform a single bone scan. You cannot do a thyroid uptake. You cannot stress test a single cardiac patient. And mine was the only name on it. I'd been the named authorized user for 14 years. Before me, it was Dr. Whitman, who retired in 2010 and hand-trained me through 6 months of NRC paperwork before he left. The Joint Commission knew me by name. The FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health had my direct cell phone. I was the registered radiation safety officer, the FDA's designated medical device contact for our hospital, and the named compliance officer on our 510(k) maintenance contracts with GE Healthcare and Siemens. I had signed every single LRI report. That's as low as reasonably achievable, the federal standard for radiation exposure, for 14 straight years. When you don't ask for a corner office, when you don't golf with the board, when you wear the same Carhartt jacket to work for 9 winters in a row, people stop seeing you. They see the work getting done and they assume the work does itself. I sat in that truck for maybe 40 minutes. Then I started making calls. Not threatening calls, not angry ones, just professional courtesy calls, the kind any departing federal licensee is required to make. First call was to a woman named Patty at the Iowa Department of Public Health, Bureau of Radiological Health. I'd worked with Patty for 9 years. She picked up on the second ring. "Howard, hey, what can I do for you?" "Patty, I'm calling to inform you that as of 9:45 this morning, I am no longer employed by St. Marian's Regional. You'll want to update your records." She was quiet for a second. Then, very carefully, "Howard, are you the named authorized user on file?" "Yes, ma'am." "And there's been a transition? They've named a successor authorized user?" "Not that I'm aware of, no." I could hear her start typing. Patty's been doing this since the Reagan administration. She didn't get excited, she just got precise. "Howard, you know what this means." "I do." "How long do they have?" 30 days from notification to designate a qualified replacement. After that, the materials license enters administrative suspension pending review. And the cesium sources, the Tech 99 generator, have to be either transferred to a licensed facility or returned to the supplier within the suspension window. Otherwise, we're looking at NRC inspection. "Yeah," she said, and I could hear her start a new email. "I'm going to need to send some formal notices. I'm sorry about your situation, Howard. Want me to email the standard documentation to your personal address?" "That'd be appreciated, Patty." The second call was to a man named Vince Caraballo at GE Healthcare. Vince had been our service rep for almost a decade, handled all the maintenance contracts on our 2 MRI machines, the CT and the nuclear medicine gamma camera. We'd shared cold beers at radiology conferences from Chicago to Phoenix. "Howard, hey, how's Iowa treating you?" "Vince, I'm calling on a professional matter. I'm no longer with St. Marian's as of today." A pause. "Wait, what?" "They restructured. New CTO has different ideas about how to handle biomed." "Howard, you're the named contract authority on every service agreement we have with that hospital. The MRIs, the CT, the cath lab fluoro unit. You're the only authorized signatory for service calls under our master agreement." "That's correct." "Holy shit. I'd appreciate it if you'd handle this through proper channels, Vince. I'm not going to do anything to interfere with patient care, but I also can't authorize anything anymore. I'm not an employee." He blew out a long breath. "Howard, you understand that any service ticket they open without an authorized signatory has to get bumped up to our compliance department. We cannot dispatch a tech without a verified hospital signatory. That's not me being a hard ass. That's federal Medicare contractor rules. We bill CMS for half this stuff." "I understand. How long do they have?" "To find someone qualified, get them credentialed, get them added to your system, and re-sign all the master service agreements? Realistically, 8 to 12 weeks, minimum. And that's assuming Whoever they pick has prior MRI safety officer credentials. If they don't, we're looking at 6 months of training before I can even put their name on a contract. I made a note in my folder. I wasn't keeping a list to gloat. I was keeping a list because I'm a procedures guy. When systems start to fail, you document. That's the job. The third call was to Carmen Ruiz at the Joint Commission Survey Office. Our triennial accreditation survey was scheduled for the following spring, 6 months out. Carmen was a former hospital administrator from Albuquerque who'd been doing surveys for 12 years. I'd been the primary technical liaison for our last 2 surveys. Carmen, just a heads up, I've separated from St. Marian's. You'll want to update your contact records before the spring visit. She made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a groan. Howard, are you serious? I am. Who's the new RSO? There isn't one yet. Who's the new biomedical engineering director? There isn't one of those either as far as I know. Madison Crane is the chief transformation officer, but she's not credentialed for any of the regulatory positions. Howard, they cannot pass survey without a named radiation safety officer. They cannot pass survey without a designated medical device safety officer. Those are conditional standards. We're talking about conditional accreditation, at minimum, possibly a follow-up adverse decision. I know. And no conditional accreditation means no Medicare reimbursement for affected service lines. Are they aware of that? I can't speak to what they are or aren't aware of, Carmen. I'm just letting you know my status has changed. I made 3 more calls that afternoon to our TC99 mirror supplier in St. Louis, to the FDA Medical Device Reporting Office, and to a guy named Thomas at Aetna who handled our facility credentialing for in-network status. Each call was 30 seconds. Each call started a clock. And each clock was the kind that you can't unwind once it starts ticking. Then I drove home, made myself a tuna sandwich, and watched the Iowa State game with my wife Diane. She didn't ask much. She'd seen the look on my face when I came in. She'd been a school nurse for 31 years before she retired. She knew what it looked like when somebody had just spent the morning inside a slow-motion catastrophe. You okay, Howie? I will be. You do anything you'll regret? Nothing I wasn't legally required to do. She nodded once, took a sip of her wine, and went back to the game. That's why I married her. The cascade started Wednesday afternoon. I know because Maribel from the imaging suite called my cell from the women's bathroom on her break. Maribel and I had hired together back in 2002. Howard, what did you do? I don't work there anymore, Mary. The gamma camera's down. We had 3 bone scans scheduled for this morning. The tech tried to run a quality control check and the system locked her out. Said the authorized user credentials had expired. They didn't expire. They got rescinded by NRC notification. Howard, the TC99 mirror generator showed up at the loading dock at 6 a.m. and they won't release it. The driver said he can't hand it over without a signature from a licensed authorized user. He's been sitting in his truck for 4 hours. They're calling Madison every 15 minutes. What's she saying? She told the loading dock to just sign for it. The driver laughed at her. She's been on the phone with somebody from corporate compliance for 2 hours. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not satisfaction? Not really. More like the feeling you get when you watch a slow car wreck and you know exactly which fender's about to crumple next because you tried to warn the driver and they told you you were dead weight. By Thursday morning, the radiology department was not running nuclear medicine. By Thursday afternoon, it was not running stress tests because the cardiology department needed nuclear medicine to interpret the perfusion scans. By Friday, the cardiothoracic surgery service had to start postponing elective valve replacements because pre-op cardiac workups required nuclear stress testing they could no longer perform in-house. That's about $150,000 a day in lost service line revenue, just from one closet and one corner of one floor. The MRI situation hit Friday around 2 p.m. One of the gradient coils on the older 1.5T scanner started throwing thermal warnings. Standard stuff. Under normal circumstances, I'd open a service ticket with Vince at GE. He'd dispatch a tech overnight, and we'd be back up by morning. But Madison wasn't on the master service agreement. Nobody at the hospital was on the master service agreement. The ticket sat in GE's compliance queue. By Sunday, both MRIs were down, not because they were broken, just because nobody could legally authorize a service call. I spent that weekend at Lake McBride. Diane and I rented a cabin we'd been talking about for years and never actually booked. I caught 2 largemouth bass and read a Louis L'Amour paperback I'd had on my nightstand since Christmas. My phone rang 14 times. I let every single one go to voicemail. Monday morning, I came home to find a thick FedEx envelope on the porch. Inside was a letter from a law firm in Cedar Rapids on behalf of St. Marian's, requesting a meeting at my earliest convenience. Underneath that, a separate envelope, hand-addressed, Father Patrick Donovan's handwriting. I called the law firm and scheduled the meeting for Wednesday at 10 a.m. Then I sat on my porch and read Father Pat's letter twice. It was 3 paragraphs. The middle paragraph was an apology. The last paragraph asked me to please come see him personally before the meeting with the lawyers. He signed it Pat, not Father Donovan. That was the first time in 14 years he'd signed a note to me with just his first name. I went to see him Tuesday morning. His office hadn't changed since 1998. Same dark wood paneling, same crucifix from his ordination, same picture of him with his sister at her wedding in 1971. He looked like he'd aged a year and 6 days. His secretary brought us coffee in the same chipped mugs we'd used for 2 decades and then left us alone. Howard, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, Pat. I owe you a great deal. I let her fire you. I should have asked questions. I should have read the consultant's report instead of just looking at the cover slide. What does the cover slide say? He laughed once without any humor. It says we'd save $410,000 a year in personnel costs. The next 30 pages, which I didn't read, would have explained that those personnel were holding the licenses that generate $11 million in annual reimbursement. That sounds about right. The board met yesterday. I figured they would. They've asked for Madison's resignation. Did she give it? This morning. Howard, I'd like you to come back. Full reinstatement. Title of Vice President of Clinical Operations. A raise. A signing bonus to make up for the disruption. I'd been expecting that too. I drank my coffee and looked out his window at the parking lot. There was an ambulance idling outside the ER bay. I could see Joe, one of our paramedics, walking somebody in on a stretcher. Pat, I appreciate that. But I can't come back. Why not? Because in 6 months or 2 years, the next consultant's going to walk in here with the next deck and the next promise of disruption. And I'm not going to spend the rest of my career waiting to find out whether my boss read past the cover slide. I've already lived through that movie. He nodded slowly. Howard, what if I told you the board has authorized a written guarantee? You can't guarantee anything, Pat. You're retiring in 9 months. Whoever replaces you can rip up any guarantee you sign. And we both know that. He sat there for a long minute. Then he nodded one more time and held out his hand. We shook. He walked me to the elevator. He's the only hospital CEO I've ever worked for who walked employees to the elevator. The Wednesday meeting with the lawyers was short. They wanted to know if I was planning to sue. I told them I wasn't. They wanted to know if I'd consult. I told them I'd think about it. On the drive home, I called Diane. Hey, hon, what if I started my own thing? Started your own what? Compliance consulting? Hospitals. Radiation safety? Medical device regulation? Joint commission readiness? Small shops that can't afford a full-time RSO. She was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then she said, Howie, why didn't you do that 10 years ago? I rented a small office in a strip mall on Edgewood Road, in between an H&R Block and a Jersey Mike's. Hung up a sign that said Sotelo Compliance Solutions, LLC. Got a federal EIN, a state business license, and a basic professional liability policy. The whole startup cost me about $3,600 and 1 weekend of paperwork. The first call came on the Thursday of my second week. It was Patty from the Iowa Department of Public Health. She'd given my name to a critical access hospital in Ottawa whose RSO had just retired. They needed help filing for a license amendment. The second call was from Vince at GE. Apparently, 3 of his other regional clients had heard about the St. Town Marion's situation through the rumor mill, and all 3 suddenly wanted compliance audits to make sure they weren't sitting on the same kind of single point of failure. Vince offered to put my name in front of all of them. I told him I'd take a referral fee out of his Christmas card if he wanted. The third call was from a hospital administrator in Mason City who said, "And I'll never forget this, we heard what happened at St. Marion's. We do not want that to happen to us. How much do you charge?" By the end of my second month, I had 11 clients. By the end of my third month, I had to turn business away. St. Marion's spent the next 9 months bleeding. They lost their nuclear medicine accreditation outright. They couldn't restart the program until the following calendar year, after they hired a new authorized user from a hospital in Omaha and put her through the NRC reapplication process. Joint Commission gave them conditional accreditation, which Carmen had warned would happen, and Aetna pulled them out of network for cardiology services for almost 6 months. The estimated revenue loss, from what I heard later through the grapevine, was somewhere between $14 and $17 million. They had to lay off 190 people. Most of them were the kinds of people Madison had called non-strategic headcount: cafeteria workers, housekeeping, 2 of the chaplains, patient transport, the folks who actually move a hospital from morning to night. None of them had ever heard the phrase "front of funnel" before they got their layoff notice. Madison popped up on LinkedIn about 4 months later. She'd taken a director of innovation role at some telehealth startup in Denver. Her post said she was excited to embark on the next chapter of patient-centered transformation. It got 84 likes. I scrolled past it without commenting and went back to a Tuesday afternoon audit I was running for a community hospital in Dubuque. About a year after Father Pat signed my non-rehire severance, his successor, a younger guy named Robert, who'd come in from a hospital system in Cleveland, drove out to my strip mall office in person. He sat in the chair across from my desk and asked if Sotelo Compliance Solutions would consider taking St. Marion's on as a retainer client. 40 hours a month, plus emergency callouts. I made him wait while I checked my calendar. I let him watch me check it. "Robert, I appreciate you coming out. We're booked through next April. Earliest I could fit you in is May, and that'd be at our standard rate, plus a 15% new client surcharge." He took it. Signed the paperwork that afternoon. I thought about it later that evening, sitting on my porch with Diane, watching the sun go down behind the cottonwood at the edge of our yard. 23 years of being treated like furniture, and the moment I stopped being available for free, suddenly I was worth a 15% surcharge. There's a lesson in that somewhere. But I'm not the kind of guy who writes lessons on the internet. I'll tell you, the only thing I figured out for sure, people like Madison, they think the value's in the title, the corner office, the wireless mic. They look around a hospital and they see square footage and software licenses and FTE counts on a spreadsheet, and they genuinely believe they can move those numbers around like Lego blocks because they took a class once in lean operations. What they cannot see, what they are constitutionally incapable of seeing, is that every complex system has somebody quiet in the middle of it whose name nobody knows, who has been holding the whole thing together with 20 years of phone calls and federal paperwork and personal favors. You don't fire that person. You document what they know. You train somebody up underneath them. You throw them a retirement party when the time comes, and you spend 10 years thanking God that they showed up to work every day. But if you don't know that, if you genuinely think the spreadsheet is the building, well, you'll find out eventually. You'll find out the same way Madison did on a Wednesday afternoon when a TC-99 meter delivery truck refuses to unload because nobody in your hospital is legally allowed to sign for it. I don't take her calls. She tried once, about 6 months in. Left me a voicemail. Said she wanted to compare notes. I deleted it before she finished the second sentence. Sometimes the cleanest revenge isn't loud. It isn't a lawsuit or a viral post or a tell-all interview. Sometimes it's just standing up, setting your keys down on the bench, and walking out the door while the building you've been holding up for 23 years quietly remembers it doesn't know how to stand on its own. I'm 60 now. Diane and I bought the cabin at Lake McBride. I work 4 days a week and fish on Fridays. My calendar is full through next September, and when the phone rings, and it rings a lot, I get to decide whether or not I feel like picking up. I've been turning that Tuesday morning over in my head for almost 2 years now, and the thing I keep coming back to isn't the satisfaction of watching it all unravel. It's how avoidable every single piece of it was. Madison Crane didn't fail because she was young, or because she had a master's degree from a school nobody had heard of, or because she wore a white blazer to a hospital. She failed because she mistook visibility for value. She walked into a building she didn't understand and assumed that anything she couldn't see on the slide deck must not exist. That's not a leadership flaw. That's a character flaw. A person who cannot imagine the work they didn't witness will always, eventually, destroy the people doing it. Father Pat failed for a different reason, and his is the one that haunts me more. He was a good man. He'd known me for 14 years. He'd shaken my hand at my daughter's wedding, and he still signed the paperwork without reading past the cover slide because he was tired and he wanted his retirement to feel like a transformation instead of a handoff. That's what comfort does to good people at the end of long careers. It makes them lazy in the exact moment when they most need to be careful. I don't think I did anything heroic. I made phone calls I was legally obligated to make. I told the truth to people who asked me direct questions. I refused to do free work for a company that had publicly humiliated me. None of that took courage. What it took was knowing, after 23 years, exactly what I was worth and refusing to discount the price. That's the part I'd want my grandsons to learn, if they ever ask me about this. Don't shout. Don't post about it on Facebook. Don't write a long letter. Just know what you carry, write it down somewhere quiet, and the day somebody tells you you're dead weight, set the keys on the bench and walk out clean. The system will tell the truth about who you were a lot faster than any speech you could give. Diane said something to me about a month after I started the consulting business. We were eating breakfast, and she looked across the table and said, "You know what's different about you, Howie? You're not waiting for permission anymore." I didn't have a good answer for her. I'm still not sure I do, but I think that's what changed. For 2 decades, I'd been waiting for somebody with a bigger title to notice me, to promote me, to say thank you. And the morning Madison fired me on a rolling chair, that whole transaction quietly ended. I stopped needing the noticing. I started doing the work for the work itself, and for the people who actually needed it. And the money and the respect followed because they always do. Eventually, if you're patient and you're useful and you stop measuring your life against somebody else's spreadsheet, that's the only lesson I've got. It's enough.